Welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD, anxiety spectrum disorders, and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Foss, and I'm a licensed clinician specializing in the treatment of OCD and anxiety disorders. So thank you so much for joining me for the podcast today. For those of you who are new, this is a question and answer based podcast where you can send me questions about OCD treatment, anxiety, how it develops, how to work with it, how to help a family member with it, anything related to it, and any of the subtypes related to it. You can send me those questions over at fearcastpodcast.com. Click on the submit a question link there, and you can email me your question. I will read all of them, consider them, and likely put them up on a future episode. You can also send me an audio question. You can send me, or you can record your question into your computer or your phone, send it over to me, or send the shared Google link or the link to that file over at Fearcast Podcast. You can also send me a question, audio or otherwise, over at Instagram. I am Fearcast Podcast over at Instagram, so you can check me out over there, subscribe, follow, whatever it's referred to over there, and I post things from time to time. I announce when episodes come out, and I share other tidbits of information that may be helpful for you or for a loved one. So today we're going to be departing a little bit from the question and answer format, and we're going to be discussing inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy, or IBT. So just a little bit about IBT before we jump into it. This is a long episode. I had a fantastic conversation about IBT. I'll say in advance, if I say weird things or question weird things or use odd terms, it's because I'm still learning about this approach as well as perhaps you are. I just ordered the handbook for it, so I'll be going through it, hopefully to learn a little bit more about it and to see how I can apply it more with my clients and perhaps share some of the information that I learn here on the podcast. So just a little bit about inference-based cognitive behavior therapy, since you are probably, this is maybe and likely is the first time you're hearing about it. Inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy is a treatment method for OCD that emphasizes the role of reasoning in the development and maintenance of OCD. Treatment is then based on the idea that obsessions are doubts that arise due to reasoning errors, leading to confusion between obsessional fantasy and reality. Inference-based CBT aims to correct the faulty thinking while resolving core insecurities at the root of the obsessional themes. So to discuss this approach in greater detail, I was joined by Carl Robbins. Carl Robbins is a licensed clinical professional counselor and is the director of training with the Anxiety and Stress Disorders Institute of Maryland, and is a faculty member with the University of Maryland School of Medicine Psychiatry Department. He has over 35 years of experience treating anxiety disorders with subspecialties in health anxiety, periuresis, and performance anxiety. His longtime mentor and co-founder of the Anxiety and Distress Institute of Maryland is Sally Winston. So without further ado, everybody, here is my conversation with Carl Robbins about inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy. All right. Well, thank you so much, Carl Robbins, for joining us today to talk about inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy. And just to start out, there's been some confusion. We were just briefly talking about between the names inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy, IBT. Tell us a little bit about that, if you could.
Yeah, sure. Actually, there are a bunch of acronyms that have been assigned to this approach. You'll see it as sometimes as IBT, inference-based therapy, IBA, inference-based approach, ICBT, which is the sort of current preferred attribution, which is inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy, It's interesting. This different way of viewing OCD from the one that most of us in the United States have been taught and trained and raised with actually comes out of a group in Montreal. Two psychologists, Kieran O'Connor and Fred Ardema, who have developed this model, as well as a therapy based on the model, and actually have shown that it can be quite effective. In fact, there was a recent study that came out by Fred Ardema showing that IBT, that the results of ICBT are comparable to those that we get with ERP and with mindfulness-based work. I want to say something here, which it's really interesting that outside of the bounds of the United States, there is all kinds of interesting work being done on OCD that can really complement or offer alternatives to the traditional American approach, we'll call it that, which is there is Fred and Kieran up in Canada. By the way, sadly, Kieran died a few years ago, and it was a real loss for the community. I want to say that. There's also metacognitive therapy, which was developed by Adrian Wells and colleagues in England. And there's also the adaptation of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy specifically for OCD, developed by this brilliant psychologist, Fabrizio Dodana, in Italy. And all of these have an evidence base that shows that they can be very effective for treatment of OCD. Obviously, the most robust base, research basis for OCD, as we all know, is ERP. And what's called the cognitive appraisal model. Sometimes you can abbreviate that as ACBT, and we can talk about how that differs from ICBT. But I think that it's important to know, that while ERP is certainly shown to be effective and is often referred to as the gold standard, it is not the only standard. Right, and that there are these other ways of working with OCD that can either complement or provide alternatives to ERP/CBT.
Right. That was one of my initial questions, and perhaps we can get into that a little bit later. Is how does actually, even before I get into that, so how ought we discuss, or how should I refer to this approach in our discussion? Should I refer to it as ICBT, inference based, IBCBT? Which would you prefer?
I will tell you that I happen to like IBT because it's easier to say, and it's easier to type on my iPhone. So IBT just seems short and sweet. So
all right. Well, for the sake of our conversation, we'll go IBT. But okay, so I mean, one of my questions has been, not certainly how IBT is going to be different than, quote, the gold standard of treatment, the American ERP traditional discussion of CBT, ERP, ACT, all that stuff. How does it differ? And where you talked about it being complementary, and it kind of sounds like sometimes I'll read elements of it, and it sounds like it's discussed as a replacement. But I wonder where they are complementary and where they are, and whether or not they are. You're shaking your head already. Go for it.
Yes. That's such a great question, and I think that they can certainly complement each other, and there are clinicians that are integrating these two approaches in the same way that there are clinicians that are integrating ERP and ACT. Right. So one way of looking at it is that IBT is one of the metacognitive therapies, right? It's the therapy that sort of addresses how we think about thinking. And a fellow traveler is ACT. Lisa Coyne and I have had conversations how so much of the IBT interventions travel well with ACT interventions, although there are some differences. So the integration possible. There are some sort of fundamental differences, though, between the what's called the appraisal-based model, which is this idea that obsessions are intrusive thoughts that are common, and that this goes all the way back to Stanley Rockman's seminal paper back in '78, showing that everybody has weird, intrusive, unwanted, or out of the blue thoughts,
right?
And that it is the appraisal of these thoughts, right? The secondary reaction to these thoughts that is what sort of drives OCD, right? And that the cognitive interventions have to do with sort of the way that people appraise these thoughts, and as well as then interrupting, then engaging in avoidance and compulsions that follow from the anxiety, disgust that these thoughts bring up. Well, O'Connor and Ardema came along and said, well, maybe there's another way of looking at obsessions. Now, and they will not deny that, in fact, we have intrusive thoughts. But if you really sort of slow it down and take a closer look, an obsession is more than just, a lot of the time, it's more than just some weird random thought. That it is actually, there's actually a story there. Mm-hmm. There's a whole narrative there. What they call an inference, right? So what we're doing in IBT is we're going upstream from the obsession and the compulsion and the appraisal of it. We're going upstream instead of looking at the way in which we actually develop these obsessions, and it's actually begins with a doubt, right? And that begins with the doubt, and then there is a faulty reasoning process that we then go through to create this story that when we are immersed in that story, it can feel quite real, quite overwhelming, very important, that we then need to do something about to address this narrative, this story, this scary movie in our heads. Mm-hmm. And so what we're doing in IBT is we're trying to sort of go back and catch that point at which we cross over into our imagination and create this story that is supported by all of these very clever reasoning tricks. Now, let me say this. I stumbled upon IBT maybe 4 years ago or so. Mm-hmm. And when I first read it, I had a similar reaction to what a lot of people do when they first take a look at it. Because as soon as people hear reasoning errors, they immediately say, oh, that sounds like Beckian, argue with your thoughts, dispute your thoughts, try to prove that they're not true, which we know usually either doesn't work or turns into a cognitive compulsion. And that's not what this is. Right, we're actually looking at the process by which we develop these obsessional narratives, right? And that you also see that, and this is something that maybe we can get into next, that I can give you an example, is that in fact we can have certainty. Now that's a controversial statement. Around here, that's a very, very controversial statement because so much of the sort of core of the traditional ERP appraisal-based model is that this is all about intolerance for uncertainty.
Right, accept uncertainty.
Yes,
we've said it a million times.
Acceptance of uncertainty. Yes. Yeah, and it's really interesting that this is one way in which the models are incompatible, right? Not that this can't be navigated, but it does require a certain amount of flexibility to sort of leave behind the sort of tolerance for uncertainty, preoccupation, and to sort of consider the difference. Let me. Do you want me to tell you a true story from my own life that actually might demonstrate what I'm talking about here?
Absolutely. Okay? Let's hear it.
Okay. So the format of this story, I will give credit. This comes from my colleague, my brilliant colleague, Michael Hetty. Mike is the co-director of the Anxiety and Stress Disorders Institute, where I'm the training director. And so I'm actually going to adapt Mike's story to my own. True story. About 3 weeks ago, I went for my semi-annual checkup with my dermatologist. Right, and he and his PA were actually doing a full examination of my skin. And they pause because they see, oh, what's that?
Not what you want to hear.
And I can hear them sort of say, oh, wait a second, let's pay attention to this.
Right.
And let me pause for a second and see if you can notice the point at which I cross over. There's a crossover point, and we talk about the crossover point.
Right.
And in IBT, where we go from normal uncertainty to obsessional doubt. See if you can spot it in this story. Okay. So they actually take a picture of it. They take a picture of this discolored mole, and and they show it to me so I can see. Yeah, I can see what they're saying, that there's some discoloration here. And they decide that they're going to do a biopsy and remove it and send it off for a pathology report. And, and they give me some reassurance. We don't think it's anything. It's probably just whatever they said, but we just need to cover our bases and sort of make sure it's,
sure.
To make sure it's not anything that needs further treatment, and they, when I go through the procedure, and then 10 days go by, and they call, and they have the biopsy results, and I call the office, and one of the front desk people answers and sort of pulls up my chart and says, "Oh, the doctor says it came back. It's completely benign. Nothing to worry about." Okay.
Great news.
Right. Great news, right? So notice that my normal uncertainty, this could be malignant. Maybe it's malignant. Maybe it's not. That is normal uncertainty.
Sure.
But notice that the question came from real life sensory experience. I saw it. I heard them talk about it. I felt the biopsy. So all of this uncertainty that was generated from it was in fact based on real world information that came through my senses.
Right. It's something that you genuinely experienced. You were there. You heard it. You felt it. None of that was a figment of your imagination.
None of it was a figment of my imagination. And the magic word here, the critical word here, and all of this is imagination, right? And we'll see what happens next.
Okay.
So, and by the way, while I was waiting for the results, I was imagining, God, what would it be like if they came back and told me that it was malignant? There was somebody that I know who just had an equivocal finding. They had to go back to the doctor and almost have like a Mohs treatment. How much deeper are they going to have to go into my skin? And what if, God forbid, it turns out that this is, metastasized?
I feel like I might have heard the crossover.
Well, actually,
are we not even there yet?
Actually, I would say that most people would sort of naturally go into that story. But again, it's sort of based on the fact that this uncertainty was launched was triggered by real world events.
Right.
Okay. So I get the biopsy results, and he says it's fine. So I hang up the phone, or even before I hang up the phone, I have the thought, well, what if she's reading the wrong chart? After all, when I think about it, people often, my last name is Robbins, but people often mistake it for Robinson. And maybe there's a guy named Robinson, like Charles Robinson, right, where she's actually misread right. She got the wrong, and it's possible, right? And then he, and that she read the wrong chart. So maybe what I should do is call back, and maybe I should call back, and I should maybe find somebody else who's maybe less careless than this person that I imagine to be careless, and,
right?
Maybe call back and check and have them check it for me.
Just double check.
Okay, so
better safe than sorry.
Better safe than sorry. Double check. So I call back. Sure enough, she reads the same results, and then I have the thought, well, wait a second. What if? What if they actually mixed up samples in the lab? When you think about it, medical mistakes do occur.
They have malpractice insurance for a reason.
They have malpractice insurance for a reason. That's such a good point. And actually, if I think about my own personal experience, 15 years ago, I can even see it. I can remember it. I can even see it. I went to Rite Aid, and I got these pills, and they were not only, I can't remember, it was either the wrong dose or the wrong medication. Medical errors occur.
And you've experienced them.
And I have the own personal experience, so I can borrow that experience and bring it in to support this story that I'm telling myself. Well, okay, so, and something else, there used to be a website called How Many of Me. And I found out that there are 300 people in the United States with the name of Carl Robbins. So what if, in fact, it wasn't Charles Robinson, but it was a Carl Robbins, but there is a different Carl Robbins.
Right. Carl J. Robbins.
Exactly.
Right.
And so, all right. So, so is this not the typical obsessional narrative?
Yeah.
And one of that has certain features. Number one, there is no end to this, and there's no end to this because I'm trying to solve or trying to figure out something that is completely occurring in my imagination. Now, I can make it sound convincing by making all of these reasoning errors, like out of context facts, general rules, hearsay. Here's another one. As I was thinking this, I could feel really anxious and uneasy. And if I'm feeling anxious and uneasy, there must be something to this. Otherwise, I wouldn't be feeling this way. As if the imagination alone can't do this,
right?
Which we can go into some more, right? Okay, right. So that's one feature. There is no resolution because my mind will only make up more stuff. There's no end to it, and isn't this how OCD works?
Absolutely.
Yeah, but what if? Okay, and again, it's supported by these. That when you look inside of it kind of makes sense, right? And I think that one of the things that patients report when they do ICBT is that we're so used to saying, we're not going into content. Content doesn't matter. And what we're not so much looking at content, but we're looking by the process by which you build this story. And then it's no longer so bewildering how we can get sort of so caught up in these narratives, right? It in its own way, it, quote, makes sense.
Right.
Okay. So here is what is really what we target at the center of IBT, which is something called inferential confusion. And there are a number of studies that show that there's a high correlation between inferential confusion, there's an inferential confusion questionnaire, and OCD, and that the resolution of inferential confusion is correlated with a decrease in the Y box in recovery and being able to function and reducing or eliminating compulsions or avoidances. Right? And what inferential confusion is that it's the confusion between sensory experience, 5 senses experience, and common sense, versus the imagination, an imagined possibility. Right?
I'm writing these down here for my own notes. I don't know if the audience is doing it too. Oh, we've got a lag. All right, go ahead.
Yes. So what you can see is that there's you could see that crossover point, right? Right. The crossover point was when I hung up the phone and say, "Oh, what if she read the wrong chart?" And boom, I was off. Right. That's the crossover point, and that the what if was an invitation to cross the bridge from the real world of information that I get through my retina and my eardrum and this and what I can smell and taste and touch and what makes common sense to me, and I cross the bridge into this OCD bubble, into this imaginary Alice in Wonderland Stephen King movie. Right. And once I'm there, there's a way out, but I'm not going to do it by arguing with content. So in that way, we it really agrees with this sort of idea that the disputation is not disputation in a traditional CBT sense.
Kind of challenging the legitimacy of the thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, but it is a recognition, right, that there's a choice, and to recognize that I've been hijacked by my imagination, and that the choice is whether I'm going to stay there, or I'm going to come back across the bridge and anchor myself in my common sense and sensory experience. Right. What I actually know to be true.
Right. In a sense, this step feels like it's the it's sort of like the anchoring, the grounding point, maybe from ACT. It sounds like the response prevention components from ACT, pulling yourself back from the brink of mental rumination.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And in fact, sort of once you cross into the bubble and you start sort of making stuff up, more and more stuff up, then you try and sort of solve this sort of imaginary problem, right? And that in fact can be a mental compulsion, or if you're so caught up in it, any scary story is going to make you feel anxious. So it's going to quote feel real. We call it a lived-in experience, and so it makes perfect sense to then engage in compulsions, or to avoid doorknobs, right? or to call back, or to say, you should send me the pathology report because I want to make sure that the Carl Robbins is me and not Carl Q. Robbins from Dundalk. So, So let me stop there, and I think what would be useful next is to talk about the movie metaphor, which I think is another way of sort of identifying this process.
Okay. Yeah, I think that'd be a fantastic thing to shift into. I mean, certainly for listeners of this podcast, we've talked about anxiety as the anxiety story. That, when you get that obsessive thought, your brain does tell you a story. It usually starts with, well, what if this happens? And it delves into that possible and confuses possible with probable. And, we don't like the outcome of that story. So therefore, we do those compulsions as a resolution, as the way we've discussed it. So this kind of adds to that and broadens it out.
So here you go. So
okay,
let's say that you and I go to the, I have a niece who likes to drag me to scary movies, and particularly I remember we went to see Texas Chainsaw Massacre 10 or whatever it was.
Sure.
Okay, so let's say that we go to Texas Chainsaw Massacre 10, all right? And sure enough, we get to that scene where the stupid teenagers are hiding in the garage, and the guy with the mask, and he oh, by the way, this particular metaphor, I want to give credit to Dave Carbonell, who actually a lot of Dave's stuff is very compatible with IBT. I want to point that out. I highly recommend Dave's work, anxietycoach.com.
Okay.
Anyway, so we're sitting there at the movie, we're seeing this sort of scary movie. Now let me point something out. What we are talking about is actually a form of dissociation. All right? That the experience, it's a form of dissociation. Mm-hmm. It's called imaginal absorption. Right? There are three sort of three subscales in the dissociative experiences scale. This is a little technical, but I think it's worth pointing out. One is depersonalization, derealization, and another is amnesia, and then the third one is imaginal absorption. And this tendency that we can have to get sort of so caught up in our imagination, in fantasy, etc., absorbed, immersed. Those, right? And in fact, there is evidence that there is a high level of imaginal absorption in people with OCD. Right?
Absolutely.
That it's elevated. And I want to point some out. What's fascinating is that although we talk about dissociation, this is independent of trauma, right? This isn't, could be, but it's not necessarily the sequela to somebody having a traumatic experience. This is a tendency, not sure we could call it a trait, but a certain vulnerability, to sort of get lost in our imaginations.
I was going to say, to a certain degree, this sounds like it may be the same thing, or maybe very similar to kind of daydreaming. That phenomenon of daydreaming.
See, that's such a good point, because actually we all dissociate.
Right.
Daydreaming, both. Right, which is you have a very, very pleasant experience, right? That's a dissociative experience. You know what else is a dissociative experience? Is going to the movies. Why do we go to the movies? Because we want to be immersed in somebody else's imagination. Right? We're being immersed in the screenwriter's imagination and the director's imagination.
Because our reality was not terrifying enough.
Yes, as if reality, and it's really fascinating, sort of like given the fact that we, particularly nowadays, we live in such a scary world, why in the world would we seek this out? But of course,
it's a great question.
So what happens in a movie, right, is that you are absorbed in the movie. And so when we're sitting there and that chainsaw revs up, we are reacting, our bodies and our emotions are reacting as if it's actually occurring, right? Our palms are sweaty, our heart could be beating fast, we can have an urge to run, right? And then somebody 3 seats down sneezes, and we suddenly snap out of it. We've like been in a trance,
right.
It's like being in a trance, and we realize, oh, it's just a movie.
Right.
Now, the moment at which we realize that it's just a movie, that in fact we are not in danger, and as Dave Carbonell says, our bodies are filled with fear, but it doesn't mean we're in danger. That's
right.
part of the trick of OCD and panic and social anxiety, right? Is that we could be filled with fear and not be in any danger, right? Is that even though, we have that metacognition, right? Oh, we're just watching a movie. This is just photons hitting a screen. That's really all that's going on, right? Is that we will still have left over adrenaline and emotions and sensations that we need to metabolize, and basically just wait until those fade. But part of this sort of faulty reasoning process that we can do is to say, oh, well, if I'm feeling this, there must be something I need to do. I need to duck under the seat or run out of the theater or whatever.
Natural biological fight or flight.
Biological fight or flight. But of course, like in panic, it's a false alarm. So there's nothing to do.
Right.
That there's nothing to do. That once we realize it's just a movie, once we realize that we've been absorbed in our imagination, there's nothing to do other than to wait until the feelings subside, and if we want, we can put our attention on something else other than the scary movie. But we're not talking about, this is not experiential avoidance, it's not distraction, it's not thought suppression. It is a shift of attention back to reality.
Right.
Back to, feeling our feet on the floor, right? Tasting the popcorn or whatever it is. All right. Now, okay. Here's, let's talk about uncertainty. So what's the uncertainty here? Well, is it still possible that somebody could bust into the theater with a chainsaw and chop us all up? Well, yeah, it's possible. But anything is possible, right? So to then say, what's the uncertainty that we're tolerating? That we're not tolerating any uncertainty. What we're doing is we're coming back to reality from our imaginations being hijacked by a very, very clever set of tricks.
Right. And I hear a lot of clients will then get into that argument with themselves. Perhaps this is it within that OCD bubble you're talking about of, well, that having someone, bust into the movie theater with a chainsaw, that's well beyond the pale of possibilities or probabilities. But, me getting stabbed or poisoned or COVID or, shot at for that matter, that's much more likely. So therefore I'm going to worry about that. They might make that shift. Maybe I'm taking it into a different direction.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good thing, and I just want to say this that a lot of sort of people, and I've heard some experts sort of object to IBT and say, oh, you're just talking about probability estimation.
Right.
And so, but we're not talking about high or low probable events. Again, we're always coming back to the process, and the process by which we get immersed in our imagination, right? And by the way, and then build this sort of convincing story. So it is the nature of the construction. It's not the nature of how relatively probable it is. All right. I was just thinking of something, but I have so much to say on this, but I just lost what I was going to say. So does that make? Let me just say.
Yeah.
Let me just say. Whether it's. It's really interesting. Think about this. why are germs such a favorite target for OCD?
Because they're invisible. Oh,
because they're invisible.
Oh, there you are.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? I know we just had a little. Because germs are invisible, right? And so they are ripe for us to imagine all kinds of things. And let's face it, when Anthony Fauci, he doesn't carry around an electron microscope. So when he's sort of explaining COVID-19, he probably, is sort of imagining the spike proteins, et cetera. Right. But he's using his imagination in a way that's sort of grounded in reality and grounded in what he's actually seeing under the electron microscope and what lab, and what studies tell him, rather than his sort of wild imagination. And it's so interesting because if you really sort of slow it down and probe, these stories that we tell ourselves can be visual and auditory, and they can. It's not just the thought, what if I lose control and stab my beloved? Is that you can actually get the image of you grabbing the knife, and
I think that point right there is where a lot of clients get so stuck. Is they'll use the line or something to the effect of, but it feels so real, and if it feels so real, aren't I supposed to trust myself, or how can I then trust anything?
That's that is really where it gets us, right? That's really where it gets us, and all right, and that is a tribute to the power of the imagination, isn't it?
It's a powerful thing.
But think about this, right? When you have a nightmare, when you're inside of a nightmare, it, quote, is real. Right? And, and all kinds of crazy stuff can be going on. You could be flying and being traced by dragons and talking to the president of the United States. Anything is possible. But when you're inside of it, it emotionally and physically feels real.
Yeah.
But then we wake up. And when we wake up, we can still be shaken by it, but we realize, that was just a dream.
We say that was crazy, or that was wild.
Crazy. But it's not. But when we wake up from the dream, right? It's not like, I need to go, get a sword so I could fight off the dragon.
Right.
There's nothing to do, right, other than to maybe wait to calm down.
Right.
And there are going to be after effects, right? So let me, what's sometimes useful is to, in terms of exploring the power of the imagination, is to sort of explore, and this is what some of us will do with our clients.
Yeah.
That will take them through a guided exercise on something pleasant, all right? And and I'll do one of two things. I'll say, and I won't do this with you now, but you can sort of try this on your own.
Sure.
Which is to sort of imagine that you're with your favorite celebrity on a desert island, and it's just the two of you, and you're walking down the beach, and the weather is perfect, and this celebrity is really into you, and you go into sort of a vivid erotic fantasy, and and if you really get into it, your body can react, if you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean.
And so, right, and that's it. It can, quote, feel real. But then when you come out of the fantasy, right, you're not going to call the celebrity for a second date. There's nothing to do.
There's nothing to do.
Right? There's nothing to do in reality with something that's occurred in your imagination and fantasy. Here's another guided exercise that we do, right? Which is imagine yourself and you buy a lottery ticket. Lo and behold, you win the Powerball, and you start fantasizing about all the things you can do, setting up and your dream car and all the vacations, and your kids are set for life and everything else. And, it can be incredibly pleasant. You can smile, and it's just like, oh, it's such a relief to never have to worry about money again. Okay. Now, when you come out of the fantasy, all right, are you going to call the Mercedes dealer and put down a down payment? It's silly. It's ridiculous.
That would be preposterous.
Right? You're not going to act on it.
Right.
Because you realize that you've just been lost.
Right.
In this case, in this pleasant bubble.
But again, I think with this fantasy you're talking about, these fantasies, these are those egosyntonic ones, the ones that those are the ones we like, and those don't trigger that tremendous fight or flight feeling with that.
No, but they can trigger pleasant feelings. But they are powerful enough to elicit an affective response. That's the point.
So to illustrate just the power of our imagination can create.
Just the power of our imagination. Let's take something as simple as close your eyes. Okay.
All right.
Close your eyes and sort of see a lemon. And imagine this is a hypnosis induction.
Yeah.
This is quick hypnosis induction. Okay, and imagine a lemon, and you imagine yourself holding it, and you can smell it, right? And then imagine sort of taking a cutting board and a sharp knife. That may be a trigger for some people, right? And you cut the lemon, and the juices flow out, and you take a wedge of the lemon, and you put it up to your mouth, and you bite down on it. Right? Okay. A lot of us who do that can feel the bitterness of the lemon.
Right.
What is that? There's no lemon. Right? Is the lemon real? No, it's this once again shows the power of the imagination. The imagination is a wonderful tool. One of my favorite quotes is from a guy named Dan Zydra, which is, he says, worry is the misuse of the imagination.
Ooh, I like it.
Worry is the misuse of the imagination. Okay, let me take you through one more experiential exercise, and this is something I want to demonstrate here.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So I want you to come up, and people on the podcast can do this.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. By the way, this is not imaginal exposure, and the role of imaginal exposure is just not something that we do in IBT, and I can explain that to you. It gets quite controversial because that's a sacred cow for a lot of people. So we can have that.
Let's absolutely talk about that in a little bit. But yes, let's go. Let's go with this.
Okay. So here's what I want you to do, and this is I want you to sort of think about a worry, a what if that you have, whether it's a realistic worry or a less realistic worry, right? All right. And okay. And when I say go, I want you for the next 15 to 30 seconds go into the worry. Okay. Ready? Go. All right, now come back. Okay. All right. Now, first of all, how hard was it to come back?
It took a little pull. It did take a little bit of a pull for me.
So there's a certain gravitational pull to sort of stay inside of the worry, right?
There's almost from my experience, it could be different from others, but there was almost like a stickiness, and as you kind of pull away, there's almost like a reverberating echo, and it gets quieter as you pull away. Absolutely, for me,
absolutely, and I will also say that can be a little bit of a not just right experience, like oh, shouldn't I sort of stay in this and sort of resign solve it or figure it out, or right that there could be.
That's a good point. Right.
It's interesting. It's called the Zeigarnik effect, but it's called the Zeigarnik effect. But we I won't get into that. So let me ask you a question. But really, sort of coming back, although you have a little bit of a pull, but coming back wasn't particularly effortful. What? By the way, you did something when I told you to come back.
What did you do? I looked at you.
That you came back and you made eye contact with me.
I grounded. Go ahead.
Which is what everybody does when you do this exercise. Whenever you say intuitively, we know to come back. Well, what are you doing? You're coming back. You're literally coming to your senses.
Right.
You are making eye contact. What is that? Oh, here I am. I'm back to reality.
I'm back with this person.
Okay. Now, what's really interesting is we also do something. We also do something when we go into the obsession or go into the worry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? All right? And see if you can notice it. Everybody does this. I've actually had only one person, and I'll tell you who that was, only one person who didn't do this. You ready? Okay. Go back into your worry. Go. There it is.
Yeah.
What'd you do?
I looked away. I looked away and down for me.
You looked away and down, right? And
people do this. People can't see that. I'm looking up.
Okay. Now, why do we do that? Because what we need to do is we need to disconnect from sensory contact with the present moment, and you could see how this really sort of gets into mindfulness and act, right?
Absolutely.
It's a fellow traveler.
Yeah.
That we need to disconnect from sensory contact from the present moment, and in order to withdraw our attention from sensory input, in order to sort of go up into the bubble, up into our imaginations, in order to go into the story. Which is why sometimes when you are recognizing you are gone, you are really lost, right? One of the best things you can do is a fundamental grounding exercise, right? I mean, I got to tell you a personal experience. Somewhat of a long story, but I was, I picked my wife up from the hospital, and she had a she had an injury, and we put her in the back seat and propped her up against the door. And I was thinking to myself, oh, make sure that you lock that door, and and getting her settled. And I took off, and I'm driving down the highway at 65 miles an hour, and then I had I never locked the door. And then it was like, what if the door flies open and she falls off? And all of a sudden I can see my beloved wife's head bouncing down the highway. And, and I just said, whoa, wait a second, boy, you are gone. And, and I got to tell you, and it took my breath away. And I literally had to ground myself. I mean, it was like that. It could be hijacked. And what's actually fascinating about that is that actually is sort of that's actually linked to a personal story that I won't go into about why that particular theme came up. Not that. That helped me sort of understand that even that was not a random event, right? That it has to do with my own history and my own what's called vulnerable self-theme, et cetera.
I want to ask about those too, yeah.
Yeah. So...
right. But I think that's such a great kind of red flag for clinicians out there to notice when someone is looking away, and also for individuals struggling with anxiety. When you find yourself disconnecting, are you looking away? Are you looking down? And also, one way to then reconnect to that person, that activity, the thing that you are ostensibly focusing on. For you, it sounds like it was driving in that moment.
Yeah. And what we are basically talking about, and let me say this, I'm getting outside of IBT here.
Sure.
What we're basically talking about is attention. What we do with our attention. All right. And this is one of the big contributions of metacognitive therapy, Adrian Wells' work. He has a whole module on attention training. And that so much of worry, OCD, even depression has to do with how we pay attention, and that we can actually train ourselves to pay attention in a different way.
Right.
Okay. So and really, if we talk about come back to the present moment, what we're talking about is bringing our attention, right? Oftentimes, bring your attention to your breath. What are you doing, right? Your breath is here. It's real. It's something that you can contact. That's tangible. Out of your mind and into your life is right.
Right.
Okay. Now, this is really, really important. That is not distraction. We are not distracting ourselves. We are not saying, we're going to push away these thoughts. We're going to push away this narrative. We're going to get rid of this narrative by counting ceiling tiles. That's distraction.
Right.
What distraction is I'm going to shift my attention, concentrate on something else with the goal of pushing something out of awareness. That doesn't work. That's where we get the ironic process. That's where our thoughts and our images tend to bounce back, which is really different than, I notice X. Mm-hmm. I can notice that it's there. I can notice it has a certain pull, but I can choose to bring my attention into my senses, into valued behavior, right, into connection with this person, right? And so what I'm doing is that I'm sort of disengaging from either the rumination or the obsessional narrative, right? And by the way, I'll say this. I think tolerance of uncertainty, when it really works, is that it is a semantic tool to get us from disengaging from rumination and from the obsessional narrative, which is, it's basically, there ain't nothing I can figure out here.
We let it go.
We let it go. We let it be. There's nothing to be resolved here. Which I will say that is quite different than saying, maybe I'm a pedophile, maybe I'm not. Mm-hmm. I really, and I'm certainly not the only one in the field that has real problems with that. Mm-hmm. And then maybe that can lead into a conversation about the feared self, the vulnerable self.
Right. To the point about distraction, we've on the show have talked about that, where the term distraction, or the words that we use, can some therapists will use different words, but I think that it's the intention behind the action. If you are focusing on I could focus on you so that my fear that you had me think about mm-hmm. disappeared or was suppressed or went away in some way. Or I can redirect to you so that I can anchor myself in something tangible. But it doesn't eliminate this other thought. It has that echo or that presence.
Yeah. And I will say that to get back to BT, it's more than just mindfulness, because what it is that once we recognize that we are caught up in our imagination, that we are, pulling in, out of context facts and appealing to sort of general rules and irrelevant personal experience and building, I think it's fair enough to say that I could sort of dismiss that, right? Which is not the same thing as sort of suppressing it. The feeling, and I'm a person with a lived experience, and I have found enormous benefit from IBT. I would say that it's taken my recovery to a different level. My experience is that I just drop the story. It's just, I'm just not going there.
It's also, it's a recategorization as useless.
It's useless, and there's a sort of a fundamental sort of letting go, disengagement, dismissal, right? But it's not suppression. It's not pushing away. It's just anything more than these are just photons on a screen. These are just words in a book. This is just a dream I had when I was asleep, right? It's that kind of almost like effortless the word that I come up with, disengagement, dismissal, etc. Look, can I come back? Let me just come back to the exercise, to the eye contact exercise. This is fascinating. The one person who was able to maintain eye contact and stay in his story was a professional actor.
Oh yeah.
And when you think about it, isn't that what acting is? Right?
Yeah.
You've got this script, right? You've got the script, which is completely made up, right? And yet what you're doing is that there are props and there are other actors on stage, and so you are engaging with them at the same time that you are following the script. That's a refined skill. That's what you learn how to do is to be able to be in both places at once. Most of us have a lot of trouble doing that, right? It's usually sort of like one or the other. We're sort of in reality or we're in our imaginations.
And that's why they get paid the big bucks, I guess.
And that's why they get paid the big bucks.
Right. So, gosh, well, and this is to a certain degree, I hear the overlap here between this approach and kind of the Michael Greenberg approach as well of letting go, which I will also maintain is easier said than done. To anybody out there who's suffering with this, who thinks that it sounds just so easy, it's easy and complicated at the same time.
Absolutely.
So if you're struggling with that, you're not the only one.
Yeah, and there is an entire sort of process that you go through, and yes, and I don't want to in any way say that this isn't I won't say hard work, but that this doesn't take time. Although what's interesting is that there do seem to be these sort of quantum leaps that people take. Actually, some of the data shows that IBT can work more quickly than ERP, and one way of sort of understanding it is that we're sort of addressing the obsessional process itself rather than what occurs downstream from the obsession. The place that we start in inference-based therapy is we plot what's called the obsessional sequence, and there's a predictable sequence. Mm-hmm. It starts with a trigger, and then there's a doubt, mm-hmm. What if, right? And then there is the consequences of the doubt, which is this story that we create with these reasoning devices, mm-hmm. with imaginal absorption. Then there's a consequence of that, which is to feel anxious or disgusted, right? And then the consequence of this, which is the compulsion or the avoidance, right? Mm-hmm. And so we spend a lot of time just sort of slowing the whole process down, right? And sort of being able to identify that sequence, and just that process of sort of stepping back and sort of seeing that is, oh, wow, right? I really am getting hijacked. And in some ways, it makes sense, right? I mean, it makes sense that I would go wash my hands or check the stove or drive back and see if I ran somebody over from inside of the story. I can't tell you how validating this is for people, right? That this isn't, that there's a reason why we get so hooked.
Well, it's kind of like, yeah, if A did lead to B, then yes, C is the thing that we ought to do. But yeah. A does not always lead to B.
Right. And in this particular case, how A leads to B is what's called inferential confusion. Right. Right. And and that's what we need to address.
Right. So I wanted to then touch on I know there's so many concepts that we could get into, but I won't make this a masterclass right now. But I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the vulnerable self themes. That's been something that, as I'm reading this, feels like this is where, as we talk about with OCD, where we've said it 100 times, that the obsessions latch onto the things that we value the most, and I think that's where that connection is. So could you talk a little bit about this?
Sure. And indeed, it always, OCD, always attacks or usually attacks the things that we care the most about. There's just really quick. There's a wonderful story about Pierre Genet, who was a historical contemporary of Freud's and was one of the first. He was a French psychiatrist, and he was one of the first to sort of explore OCD. And he was interviewing a woman that had sort of standard, harming obsessions about her baby. And he said to her, well, why don't you have harming obsessions about your husband? And she had a great response. She said, well, I don't love my husband enough to have harming obsessions about him, which just sort of captures the sort of essence of how OCD can look this.
And then that would lead into our OCD in a hurry.
Yes. Oh, yes, exactly. Well, wait a second. If I'm not having harming obsessions, that must mean that I don't really care about my husband.
I don't love him. I should do. Yeah. Oh, goodness.
Yes. Exactly. So then what happens is that the obsession becomes a checking compulsion.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Well, let me try and have a harming obsession. Oh my God, it doesn't bother me. I'm with the wrong guy. Anyway, so.
Sorry, go ahead. I sidetracked this.
So related to this, these sort of core self themes is this idea of the vulnerable self, which in is some. I mean, one way of looking at it is that there's the self as is, and then there's the self as could be, right? And in some ways, this is the imagination on steroids, right? That sort of somehow I don't really know who I am, right? That there's that I'm not really Dr. Jekyll. That really deep down inside I'm Mr. Hyde, all right? And usually this vulnerable self theme, there's a that if we look at our obsessions, there's this, some people could say it's Greenberg might say it's the core fear, right, but it's something like, this is the kind of person I'm the kind of person who could be, right? And it could be careless and reckless, right? I'm the kind of person who can lose control, right? I'm the kind of person who really doesn't care about other people, and that I'm sort of selfish and manipulative, and right? And in fact, this is exactly the opposite of who you know yourself to be in reality, right? That in fact, when you observe yourself in reality, you are a person who's actually over controlled. You care about people to a fault. You are vigilant about you're actually quite careful and not a space cadet. And now I can hear people saying, right, oh, well, that just sounds like a reassurance compulsion.
Yeah. Yes. as I was reading more and more about this, there is an element that does feel like some of the exercises can lean in that direction.
Yeah.
How do you separate those two then?
Yeah. And I think it all depends on the function of it, right? And which is that are you sort of frantically trying to tell yourself this story in order to reassure yourself, that you're not a serial killer, a pedophile, or a baby killer, or having a different sexual orientation than you know yourself to do, right? That which is okay. So that there's another process that we go through, right? And this again, I will say that a lot of people say, well, this sounds like a reassurance compulsion, and it's not.
Okay.
All right. Which is the alternative story.
Mm-hmm.
And the alternative story is based on reality, based on what you can actually observe about yourself when it comes to the vulnerable self theme, and that we are so good at constructing these imagined scary stories that for many of us we need to actually spend some time constructing these sort of reality-based stories. Now when we do this process in ICBT, at least at the beginning, we're not doing it at the moment that we're triggered. Because if we do it at the moment that we're triggered, then you're right. It's just going to become an argument, and some reassurance compulsion that's going to fail. So what we do is that we actually sort of build this story, this reality-based story. It could be of the true self, or of what's actually sort of happening with doorknobs, or the oven, or our relationship with our kids. And that what you're practicing doing is immersing yourself in reality, strengthening that muscle in the same way that we have an overactive muscle when it comes to immersing ourselves in the could be, the what if, the scary stories, right? And that over time, let me borrow something from Donna, the guy who developed MBCT, which in many ways is the fellow traveler with ICBT, which is, he frames OCD as a trust disorder. It's a really just sort of really, really interesting idea.
Right.
And then what happens is, we just faded out. I'm losing you a little bit.
Oh.
Let's see. You still there?
I'm still here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That may be my Wi-Fi. So, okay, is that it's a trust disorder. And then what happens is that in OCD, we lose trust in our senses. Like, for example, I can see that the oven is off, right? But I can't quite trust that I'm actually getting the right information. That we mistrust our memories, like, maybe I actually did something horrible and I don't remember it. Maybe I ran somebody over, and not only did I not see it or hear it, but or maybe I did see it and hear it, but I don't remember it, right? So we mistrust our senses, our memory, and ultimately ourselves. That I'm the kind of person who could snap and do something horrific. That I'm the kind of person who could be negligent and allow my kids to get injured. or I'm the kind of person who's, who's not really a person of faith, that I'm actually, a blasphemous heretic, and so what IBT offers is the possibility of ultimately restoring trust in yourself. And let me tell you that is a whole lot different than let me tolerate the uncertainty about who I am. Maybe I'm a pedophile, maybe I'm not. Right? Maybe I'm a murderer, maybe I'm not.
Right. I hear, I think there's something incredibly powerful in that idea of when I first had read that, probably on the forum, the Facebook forum, talking about this, it resonated very strong with me, to the idea that it's a trust component, or an element of trust. I hear that, I guess, how does IBT deal with kind of the obsession, similar to what if I'm becoming or turning into someone who is a pedophile? Because I can rely back on what I've done. I know I haven't done anything.
Okay.
But what if I become? Okay. And the same thing would be for sexual orientation OCD.
Okay. So let's plot that.
Yeah.
So let's plot that. As soon as you hear the what if, all right?
It's usually the red flag.
That's the crossover point, right? You are going over the bridge into your imagination, right? And the question is, what is it about reality here, right now, that tells you you're a pedophile?
So
nothing.
Well, what if the response might be, all right, well, I had that thought about, I had a sexual thought about that child I saw over there. Isn't that what a pedophile would say? I'm being devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
I'm not getting free therapy here.
Right. And we could also say, oh, well, not only did I have that thought, all right.
Yeah.
It's I felt some kind of tingle in my groinal area. I felt a groinal sensation.
Great, more evidence.
Right? Great, more evidence.
Right.
All right. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, that's what a pedophile is. Right. I mean, it is. But let's sort of step back from that.
Yeah.
Right. And let's look at your behavior. Let's look at your fantasies. Right. That's and again, this can sound like refutation, reassurance. Right, and say, oh, well, you're just going to have to learn how to live with the uncertainty. I think we can do better than that. That in fact, what is it that really tells you, that a thought tells us anything about who we are. Right. Right. I mean, I can generate a thought. I can generate a thought that and I could actually generate a thought that is that I could be an NBA basketball player, and I'm going to sit by the phone. And I can picture myself. I can picture myself, getting called by the Golden State Warriors right. I mean, so does that mean I'm a basketball player? I mean,
But I feel it so much.
And again, there we're back to there must be something to it if I feel it in my body. Well, ain't that the power of the imagination?
Right. Yes, and then that difference between having an experience versus having desire, or having arousal versus having desire. Those are different things.
Yes, and this gets into Emily Nagoski's stuff on all the research, right, on non-concordant arousal, and there are people that will criticize that because that can turn into a reassurance compulsion, which it can.
Certainly,
right? but it can also be used. Let me say something about reassurance.
All right.
Okay. Fred Ardema, one of the my mentor in IBT and one of the co-developers. I was telling you, when I was skeptical, and I was saying to him, Fred, that sort of sounds like reassurance. I could just see, people from the States saying it sounds like reassurance. And he said to me, "What's wrong with reassurance?" Reassurance is only a problem if it becomes a compulsion.
So we're going to be burning him at the stake at the IOCDF conference?
Drew and Slot is an interesting podcast. One of your competitors he makes a distinction between assurance and reassurance. When I got that biopsy result, that's reassurance. What the hell's wrong with that?
Right.
Information. Reality-based information is
helpful.
Is helpful, and it's humane. There's this sort of crazy. It gets kind of crazy. This kind of, abstinence from anything that sort of sounds like reassurance. That if we say, that we somehow are going to be reinforcing our patients' OCD if we give them useful information. Let me also say something about the "what if I'm a pedophile" thing. There's another sort of nature. There's a and the feared self, and what could I become? There's something, and Fred talks about this. There's something so selective and arbitrary about it, right? It's like, well, why this? Well, in every other context that doesn't have to do with your vulnerable self theme, if you have a thought like that, you'd say, well, that's a nutty thought.
Right.
That doesn't mean anything to me. So look, here's a Mike Hetty exercise. All right. Trees fall on houses. I have a large evergreen that's, and it's been kind of shaky. There have been some limbs that have fallen out. Oh, what if that tree is unstable, and maybe I need to go, stare out the back window and make sure that the tree isn't falling on my house. Mm-hmm. Right? That doesn't hook me because it's not, it doesn't sort of hook into it's not connected to trauma. It's not connected to a particular sort of vulnerability of mine. If I had some history with that, it might hook me. Right. If I lived in the Midwest where there are a lot of storms and, my neighbors' houses were getting crushed, but, it makes sense that might, but it still doesn't mean, and this again is that sort of, is that inferential reasoning error, which is that it still doesn't mean that my tree in my backyard has anything to do with, with the tornado that caused my neighbor's tree to fall on their house.
Right. Those are different
again,
trees.
This is this sort of out of context reasoning that's part of OCD's trick to get us to sort of pay attention and engage with these narratives.
Right.
But they're so arbitrary. They're so selective, right? And it's something that we don't do. Even people with the most sort of intense OCD, they don't do it in other arenas.
Let's say that thought about the tree had captured you. Would that speak to a vulnerable self theme of something like, I'm the person where bad stuff happens to them.
Yeah, yeah, I'm yeah. That I'm fundamentally sort of snake bit. I have bad luck.
I put myself in bad situations because I bought the house.
Yeah, there you go. And as you and I sort of talk about it, we're now using our imaginations to imagine the kind of thinking that somebody else might do. But you could see that if that was your theme, that it would hook you.
Yeah.
Right. But it doesn't make the tree the tree falling on the house any more relevant than it is to you or me who doesn't have that vulnerable self-theme.
Right. So to that end, to the discussion about reassurances, right, and things that are reassuring. I know we've taken a lot of time, and I'll let you go here in a little bit.
No, I'm fine. I'm fine. I love talking about this stuff. I got to tell you that this is just sort of such an exciting and interesting way to work. Let me just say as an aside, which is that this is not the Holy Grail. This is not the panacea.
It's not magic.
Fred will be the first. Fred Ardema, the co-developer, will be the first person to say, CBT doesn't work for everybody. And in the same way that ERP doesn't work for everybody, and one of the missions of some of us in the world that, in the OCD community that are drawn to things like IBT or metacognitive therapy or MBCT is that let's be more flexible and open. That if this ain't working,
maybe the
solution isn't come back when you're ready, or you just have to do more of it, or you're not doing the exposure the right way. That may be true, or maybe there's something else. There's an alternative approach that we can either incorporate or see that as a standalone package and see if that works. And that's really, I think, and I will, and I'll give Jeff Szymanski, credit that he really is, open to hearing different voices. One of the good news is that Mike Hetty, who's really a wonderful teacher in terms of IBT, is now part of the BTTI, is part of the IOCDF training. Which is for me incredibly exciting. Let me say one other thing. We now have over 250 members of this Facebook page of clinicians who are interested in exploring IBT. We call them IBT curious, and and if there are clinicians out there who want to join us, send me an email. I think it'll probably be on your page notes or whatever. It's a wonderful learning community. There is a subset of people who like me are people with lived experience and found enormous benefit from this way of viewing OCD, right? And I think that there's something worth paying attention to there. And these are, some of us, some of them are people that have spent years doing ERP, which isn't to say that it hasn't been beneficial to them, to doing to using the appraisal-based model, et cetera, but the fact that this can sort of really resonate with clinicians who know OCD from the inside out, that's worth paying attention to. That's worth checking out.
Right. And as I read more about it and I hear more about it, there is something that resonates and feels feels true and feels very helpful and applicable in these situations, where I think in some areas of CBT, of just traditional CBT, it's kind of missing something. It's kind of like how I felt when I heard when I first started hearing about ACT as the one of the missing puzzle pieces in relation, especially in relation to like, what do you do with your brain in the middle of an exposure?
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, and and there was a lot of resistance in the in the sort of conservative part of the of the behavior therapy. And it's still happening. But aren't we all tribal? I mean, aren't we all chimpanzees in our troop who want to go to war with the troop across the that's sort of being human, and I think our job is to sort of accept that is inevitable, and to be aware of that we all have that tendency, and to sort of be able to sort of step back and say, hey, let's at least be a little bit curious about, do you want to talk about imaginal exposure, or do you need to go?
I can. Why don't we talk about some imaginal exposures, and then I think that this will be one of the winning longest podcasts. Okay. So just to sort of summarize, sort of what are some of the sort of potential incompatibilities between sort of traditional CBT ERP treatment and IBT? One of them is this whole notion of the difference between normal uncertainty and obsessional doubt, and what is the role of tolerance of uncertainty. And that is not a focus of IBT, which is a real change for a lot of people, right? Because that is, many see that as the as the core metacognitive shift or cognitive shift. And right.
So another one is, there are a couple, but another one is the role of imaginal exposure. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So now I will say that I know that the literature shows that imaginal exposure can be very helpful for people. I know that there are people who have been in treatment, and that has been an important part, or a
central tool,
important part, or the central helpful modality, right? My own personal experience is that, and I'm not the only one, is that imaginal exposure often sort of doesn't work very well, right? And that when it really works, it's that the story gets so outrageous and preposterous that it sort of collapses, and it creates a kind of diffusion, like this is BS, right? Right. I mean, I think that's what happens largely when imaginal exposure is really helpful, But here's the question: if imaginal absorption and inferential confusion is what drives so much of OCD, why would we want patients to rehearse that? Mm-hmm. Why would we want patients to practice crossing the bridge, getting so immersed, lost in their imagination? Okay, so people would challenge lost, but so immersed in their imagination to make it so vivid, mm-hmm. right? That it seems to me, that as I've understood the role of inferential confusion or imaginal absorption, it doesn't make sense to actually encourage or have people practice that. Now I know that something else can happen when you get people to do that, but I think that there certainly are people that sort of, I've met clients that have sort of been given imaginal exposure, and all it does is just, make them, they don't really learn anything. They just feel incredibly upset. Some people will say they're traumatized by it. that may be somewhat of an exaggeration, but that they don't find it helpful at all. That, particularly as we're getting away from a habituation model, right? And which is the idea that, I'm going to replay the script over and over and over again until it doesn't bother me so much anymore. I could see where that happens, but and if that's been an important part of your treatment, or you're a clinician and you see that very helpful, I understand your experience is not mine, but it's just I think it's unnecessary and in some ways just basically incompatible with my current understanding of and other people's understanding of OCD. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it seems like it's almost the acknowledgement that the person is already having enough of these thoughts. So to have more is unnecessary, and furthermore, you are playing. As you said, you're rehearsing the process of going into your OCD bubble.
Yes, and I want to say something. It's more than thoughts. It is
the experience of it.
It is mental imagery that can be vivid, and as we say, right. Like people will say, "My God, how could I? There must be something to this because I feel it so intensely." Well, if you want to do imaginal exposure as a way of sort of demonstrating the power of the imagination, great. Okay, but let's be clear what the intent there is, right? Right. We're not trying to sort of get people to habituate to it, right? Or to learn how to sort of tolerate the distress, that can be created by this incredibly horrific story.
Right. I think that, yes, I think that's a very fair criticism of cognitive or imaginal exposures. There's a lot to be said, I think, in either direction. And, I've certainly assigned them. I'm sure you assigned them in the past as well. But there can be if the approach or the understanding is this is an exercise to experience the power of your imagination whilst you practice response prevention. While you practice, I say it to clients this way: it's that thoughts that suck. In other words, there's no unsucking a bad thought. That thought is uncomfortable. If you feel uncomfortable, it's like because they're uncomfortable. In a sense.
Yes. And yes, and I can, I can see the, and I could see the support for that. I understand that that's a particular model is, but as Reed Wilson says, it's just not what I do. And I think it's important to say that, that there are multiple roads to Rome. Right? There's not just one road to Rome, and if this road isn't working, it doesn't mean that you just have to, continue going down the same road, only this time with more commitment and more courage and and more hours and that may be true, or maybe it's time to try a different road. That we're all trying to sort of bring this message to the community, like let's bring to our patients that there are options, right?
Yes.
That the gold standard is not the only standard.
Right.
And if to the extent to which I can make that contribution to the OCD community, that will be a satisfactory legacy for me.
Well, I think that you've I think that you're doing that right now. I think that you've been doing a lot of that in the work, certainly on the Facebook groups, kind of preaching to the choirs I suppose. But I do appreciate your time. I think we'll call it quits here. And I think there's if folks do have questions for you for a future episode, would you be open to coming back on and chatting about how to apply some of this stuff?
I'd love to. I love talking about this stuff, and I'd be happy to come back anytime. This has been a great experience. This is what works best for me, is a conversation. I am the world's worst presenter when it comes to sort of slides and lecturing.
I find that hard to believe, but all right.
I'd love to. I'd love to have conversations like this, and I hope that all of us can have more and more conversations like this with openness and curiosity and respect for each other.
Carl Robbins, thank you so much for all of your time. I really do appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Okay. Great. See you again soon. See you on the Facebook group.
I'll see you on the Facebook group.
Okay. Bye.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for making it through that very long episode. I will try to keep this last bit short, but again, thank you so much for making it through. So I asked Carl if he would be willing to answer any questions on a future episode that you might have about how to integrate IBT into your treatment, or about maybe some of the topics that we discussed. Maybe, if you want to go further in detail, I would love to go further in detail with Carl about the role of exposure. We kind of talked about how exposure in this approach is kind of a sometimes thing. More questions. I know we've talked a lot about scripting as exercises, and obviously Carl is not for them necessarily. So if you have questions for a future episode, go over to fearcastpodcast.com, send me your question over there, and once I get enough of them, I'll wrangle Carl back on for another conversation to go further in depth about this. So everybody, please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you have questions about your treatment and need a little bit of help and assistance, go over to fearcastpodcast.com. You can click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information and some links there that may be helpful for you. So everybody, until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye.